The answer to the question in the title of this video is probably very, very different for every single one of you, but I'm fairly sure that quite a few of you are thinking about some of the most outrageously expensive and radical bikes on the market. And some may not agree with me when I say that if money were an object, the bike that I'd have in my garage without a second thought would be the new Triumph Bobber 2026. More specifically, that stunning black and blue edition available this year. Why? I'll tell you in this video.
Golden haze on a dashboard glass. Miles pulling everything past. Didn't ask the word to last, just riding out the overcast. No heroes here, no big theme, just asphalt keeping me clean. Thinking less than I might seem. Let the silence set the scene. Westbound quiet in my head. Things I said, things I never said. Doesn't matter where I'm led. I'm lighter than I was instead.
First of all, maybe it's worth explaining why I wouldn't go for one of those super bikes packed with every bit of technology imaginable and more horsepower that I could ever realistically use. For me, and I don't know if you feel the same, riding is almost a form of meditation. It's a way to experience a bit of adrenaline, yes, but also to slow everything down afterwards. I mentioned something similar when I spoke about the GB350S. Bikes like those ultra sporty 1-liter machines or more, honestly, to me, they don't make much sense on today's roads. If you properly wind it up in second gear, that's probably enough to lose your license, or a few points if you've got that system in your country. So in the end, it doesn't really matter how much money I've got, because the speed limits and the context are the same for everyone, at least in theory. That got me thinking, what would I actually add to my dream garage? What would be the must-have? And the truth is, ever since I rode in California, there's one bike that keeps appearing in every single version of that dream, and that is a Triumph Bobber. I had barely seen one in person before, had even sat on one, but visually, it had always drawn me in from the moment it was launched. That feeling created by the absence of the subframe, it's almost, at least to my eyes, almost hypnotic. I love it.
Shake the rust off all my stuff. Skies go copper as
And then you've got the centerpiece, the 1200cc one-wheel engine with the twin exhaust perfectly outlined with the frame. And the finishing touch is the teardrop fuel tank, classic and timeless. The Bobber's design has to be one of the cleanest and the most beautifully resolved of the decade, alongside maybe, from my point of view, the Vitpilin 701. And the clever part is that it doesn't achieve that look by hiding everything behind plastics or fancy materials. It does it by celebrating the mechanical side of the bike. It doesn't pretend to be anything else, it shows you exactly what it is, and it's proud of it. On the mechanical side, just a quick recap, it runs a well-known 1200cc parallel twin, as I said, the one you will find across the upper end of the variable range. In this setup, it delivers 78 horsepower and 106 Newton meters of torque. And that torque figure is quite important, you will see why. And unlike the 900cc bikes in the variable range, this one comes with a 6-speed gearbox, and it generally feels like a bike you could tour on endlessly. And from 2026 onwards, it can also be restricted for an A2 license. What a way to start your motorbike career, by the way. Now, if I tell you it weighs 250 kilograms ready to ride, you would probably expect, like I did, something a bit heavy-handed and reluctant in the bends. Maybe not terrible, but certainly not something you would describe as agile. On paper, and given its style and concept, you would imagine a very laid-back machine, perfect for short weekend rides at a relaxed speed. And yes, it absolutely excels at that. The moment you see it between your legs, and it's a very low, narrow bike, it almost asks you to slow down. Everything about it invites a calm and hurried riding. Just sitting on it already feels like the first cool thing, the first cool moment of the day. There's something about that ultra-low seat which looks like it's floating in mid-air, with no visible subframe, by the way. It's a really nice experience, feels very special. And then you reach down to the side of the bike to turn the key. And yes, I know it sounds stupid, silly, but I still love that detail. It feels like you are physically waking up the engine with your own hand. Like it needs a little nudge from you to come to life. And when it does, the sound is gorgeous. And no, it's not quite on the same level as Scrambler 900. For me, that's still the best sounding bike of 2026, but it's deep and rich, and it never becomes intrusive, neither for you nor for anyone around you. Now, once you're moving, everything feels tactile. The throttle, the brake lever, the clutch, they all feel solid and substantial, thicker somehow. More deliberate. There is a sense of weight and elegance compared to the other models in the range. And as you ease the clutch out, you notice the pulse of the pistons straight away. It pulls with authority from very low revs, almost like if you barely needed to touch the throttle to get moving with intent. And yes, it's a bigger machine and it's not the most agile thing in the world, but the drive it delivers is convincing and immediate right from the bottom of the rev range. My first proper contact with the Bobber was actually in the city in Oceanside, California, and that's where it surprised me first. With both feet flat on the ground at all times and enough grip to shuffle it backwards or steady yourself in tight turns, it's far easier to manage than you would expect. Filtering through traffic is no drama at all, and parking it, even on slightly uneven ground, it doesn't feel intimidating. And I'll be honest, that's when I started to warm to it properly. The next morning, we finally headed onto the open roads, first along the California motorways, then towards Palmer Valley and Lake Henshaw. The cruise control, which comes as standard and works off a single button, is generally useful when your right wrist needs a break. Yeah. And it proved that the Bonneville range can embrace modern tech without giving up the analog clocks. I had to say it. I'm talking about you, Scrambler 900. And unlike the tighter route we had with the Scrambler 900 the previous days, these roads were wide and flowing with long radius corners and lanes so broad you could comfortably fit two cars side by side. It meant we could settle into an easy pace, glancing across the scenery every few seconds. And out there, the Bobber feels completely at home. After a couple of hours, my colleague on the T120 started to up the pace once he realized how easily he could touch down the pegs. It was some sort of game for him. I remember thinking it might be tricky to keep up with the Bobber, especially with that front tire. But in reality, it held its own. The obvious limitation is a lean angle. There's only so much room before something touches down. Still, by taking slightly wider, smoother lines, I managed to stay with the 120, all the while hearing the Speedmasters behind me scrapping everything. The engine pulls like a train. You can stretch the gears if you want, but you don't need to. Between one bend and the next is really a small twist of the throttle is enough to fire you towards the next braking point. And honestly, it feels a lot happier in that strong mid-range than screaming at the top end. The riding position is interesting. It's not nearly as extreme as photos make it look. You are slightly lean forward in a kind of a retro naked stance, but it's far more natural than expected. We spent the whole day on it, and only towards the end did the fatigue start to creep in. In short, it was a real surprise. The Bobber is far more dynamic than it looks suggests, and is much closer to a retro naked in character than a pure cruiser. By the end of the day though, with my body starting to feel it, I couldn't help glancing over at the seat on the beautiful Triumph Speedmaster we also had with us. Nothing wrong with the updated Bobber seat at all, but after several hours of riding, that thicker padding and the backrest of the Speedmaster were definitely very tempting. And that's when the second surprise of the day arrived. I rode most of the way back to Oceanside on the Speedmaster, which mechanically is almost identical to the Bobber. Same 1200cc engine, same electronics, now with lean-sensitive ABS and traction control, and cruise control as well. Same chassis, same 47mm Showa fork, Kayaba shocks at the rear, and the key differences are in the ergonomics and the weight. 263 kilograms ready to ride instead of 250, plus a setup clearly aimed at a slower pace and greater comfort. The handlebars, they sweep back towards you in a sort of V shape, and the riding position is noticeably more relaxed. Your legs are stretched farther forward, your back more upright. It is undeniably more comfortable. I tried to keep up the same pace I had found on the Bobber, but the very low foot pegs quickly reminded me that this isn't the bike for pushing on, unless you're happy to leave half of your bike on the tarmac. Even so, the Speedmaster steers more lightly than you would expect. It feels planted and solid, almost like a locomotive laying down its own track wherever it goes. The seat though is a real highlight. It's so soft and comfortable. The whole experience feels almost surreal, like in a video game, because you sit like in your sofa at home, and yet you're still rolling on the throttle with the same strong surge as the Bobber. Even if the exhaust note has lost a bit of the raw edge, and I don't know why, because it's got the same exhaust or very similar on the same engine, but it really felt like that. And I admit, I had never really pictured myself owning a bike like this one, but taking a step back or two, I found genuine enjoyment in that smoother, more measured style of riding, one that blends into the landscape rather than trying to slide through it at full speed. Back at the hotel, I seriously considered getting one. The Bobber cost 16,700 euros in Spain, and a couple of thousand more in Austria, because we paid some extra taxes, and usually I'm all pro taxing expensive vehicles. But if it affects me, then it's not that fair. In Austria, it goes for, I think, a bit more than 18,000. So it's not super bike money, not like the Panigale V4S, but it still is a serious amount of cash. And it's not easy for me to justify. To make room for it, I had to sell one of my bikes, maybe even both. And realistically, it wouldn't replace what the Scrambler or the Himalayan do for me. But in a true dream garage, the common denominator wouldn't be 220 horsepower superbikes. It would be this Triumph Bobber in blue and black. Beautiful and pure. Yeah, the only problem with this is that I want one and I need it to be cheaper so I can have more bikes in my garage. Because the truth is that money still is an object. What can we do? That's the truth. Yeah, thanks for watching. I will see you soon, hopefully. Take care. Bye-bye.